electric motoring and is in an absolute perfect position to do so. So over to you, Hugo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Hello, good morning, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. Kat, could we have the first slide, please? We are a sustainable car company rather than a hydrogen car company. Although we're building hydrogen cars, Kat, could we next one, please? This is our purpose statement, and it's embedded in our articles of association as a fiduciary responsibility of the board to pursue systematically the elimination of environmental impact of personal transport. And there are two key words really in this. First is elimination. We don't believe that reduction is a sufficient goal, but because being less unsustainable is still not sustainable. But it's an ambitious goal, and we're not going to get there overnight. So the other key word is systematically. We've got to make sure that every investment we make is taking us towards the end goal, rather than down some slightly less damaging blind alley. Because if you reach a dead end, you can't get to where you want to get to, and you've got to write off all the investment you made in getting to the wrong place and start all over again. So we take a very long view of developing something that, even if it isn't completely sustainable at the moment, is on a roadmap towards a completely sustainable solution. Now, we are, although we're a car company, although we're building hydrogen cars, we absolutely do not believe that it's a hydrogen versus battery technology race. They're different, and we need them both. We don't argue about whether it's solar PV or wind turbines that are going to win the renewable energy race. They're just different. We need them both, and it's a very silly question. And the same is true of batteries and hydrogen. However, hydrogen vehicles can be a great deal more efficient than battery electric vehicles for the sort of range to which we become accustomed. And so the differentiating factor between where we use batteries and where we use hydrogen is really one of range and also of utilization. So vehicles that can't afford the downtime, taxis in London on multiple shifts, for instance. So short range applications, absolutely we believe in batteries, and running battery and hydrogen technology alongside, actually we will reach our decarbonisation goals much more quickly, and we are both technologies are of benefit to each other. Also, it's worth pointing out that we are, as a sustainable car company, we are very keen. We are probably the only car company in the world who think we've got far too many cars. And Gary just pointed out that those with cars seem to have much louder voices. It reminds me of hearing Ben Elton probably 25 years ago saying that, why is it that whenever the government puts any money into roads, it's an investment, but whenever they put money into public transport, it's a subsidy? What's the difference? And I do think that it's not what we're working on, but what we are working on is only one part of the changes we need to see. We need a lot of complementary policy changes as well. Kat, you move on. So this is a generic slide of the constraints that we're all facing. Every company, every country is facing this converging funnel, principally of environmental pressures, climate change, energy security, resource depletion, and the regulatory response to that. Next. And companies that evolved in the last century, companies are shaped by the constraints within which they operate. Business is shaped by it. And those industries forged in the 20th century, like the auto industry, are now bumping along the walls of this funnel because the constraints we face were simply not on the radar when they developed their business models. And staying away from the walls of this funnel is expensive and painful, and it's always a cost on the bottom line. Next, please. And it's not surprising, though, because the profit motive lies way outside this funnel. If you sell cars, you make more money by selling more cars. So you're directly rewarded for maximizing resource consumption. And I, for one, don't see how we can ever have a sustainable industrial society based on rewarding industry for the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. So as Juliana said, I think that the changes in innovation in business model are every bit as important as in technology. Next, please. So this is the car that we're running at the moment, and we're building a fleet of 20 going into trial in South Wales in Monmouthshire, and this car is we have the only advantage, the only luxury really of being a startup company is we have no legacy constraints. We can start from a clean sheet of paper. So it's actually the rasa. It's named after tabula rasa, or clean slate in Latin, and that refers not just to the technology but the business model as well. And we have taken a clean sheet of paper approach to how you build a car. Hydrogen technology is so different to combustion engines, and we feel that you need to build a car in a different sort of way, and it reduces all the technical barriers to bringing them to market. It also reduces the costs, and it leads to at least a threefold improvement in energy efficiency as well. Now, the industry, by and large, almost all the major car companies have got hydrogen vehicle programs, and the thought leaders, people like Toyota and Daimler-Benz, have been saying consistently for the last 15 years that it's the end game, but they are necessarily having to put their technology, hydrogen technology, into the sort of cars they make, in the manufacturing model they have, and the distribution model, and the business model that they have, and fuel cell, trying to persuade a fuel cell to behave like a petrol engine, it really doesn't do it very well. And it places a huge amount of stress on the technology, and they're having to develop it beyond the state of the art. And that's why it's taking a long time to bring it to market. So next one, please. Our car has got the same acceleration as the Toyota, which is pictured there, top right. It's 9.5 seconds to 60. The Toyota's a 4-seater car, ours is a 2-seater. We're not suggesting they're directly equivalent. But nonetheless, the Toyota, for the same acceleration with 4 people rather than 2, has a fuel cell that's over 13 times as powerful. I believe they spend over 8 billion to get to this point, which I can assure you we haven't. And also, our car, that Toyota uses over 3 times as much hydrogen per mile. And that difference is really a breakthrough at the system level. It's not at the subsystem technology. We've got a fuel cell that is made for forklift trucks for Walmart warehouses. So it's a tiny little thing. It produces 8.5 kilowatts. It's not quite enough to power 3 domestic kettles, but it is enough to keep this car running at 60 miles an hour. However, as I said, don't want to talk about the technology really. The business model is more important. So, Kat, next one, please. This is a slightly tongue-in-cheek illustration of just how ill-fitted to the 21st century the business model of the industry is. And these 2 cars were made by the same company 70 years apart. And you've got to remember that less than halfway through that period in 73 was the oil crisis. So the car on the left, 948, next one, please, did 38 mpg. And next one, on the right, 38.6 mpg. And you might reasonably expect a little bit more progress than that. But the reality is that if you sell cars, there's no incentive to improve efficiency. We actually argue there's a disincentive. It does cost more to make a more efficient car, and customers will always discount any future cost savings almost to the point of 0. So if they won't pay a premium and it costs you more to make it, it just reduces the profit margin. And therein lies the disincentive. So next one, please, Kat. So we believe that more important even than hydrogen or batteries is we need to see a change in business model. We need to see efficiency become profitable. And if efficiency were profitable, we'd see a rash of 100 mpg cars out there tomorrow. So next one, please. We are never going to sell a car. We're only ever going to sell a service contract, rather like that for a mobile phone, where customers will take a car. Typically, it can still be your own car. It can live on your drive, or it can be a shared car in a car club. And we're not selling the car, we're selling the mileage. The customer signs up for the contract and pays a monthly direct debit with a fixed price element and a mileage rate. And that covers everything. It includes, most importantly, the cost of the fuel, but it is literally the only transaction you have in having the usership of a car. And at the end of the contract, the car comes back to us. We don't sell it into the second-hand trade. We provide it to a second-hand, a third-hand, a fourth-hand customer. And the two differences between a lease and what we're doing is that the car stays on our balance sheet through to end of life. And secondly, that we internalize on our own P&L all the operating costs of the car. And it means that the cost of motoring is entirely predictable, not just for the first-hand owner or user, but for somebody who's a fourth-hand user of a 10-year-old car. Their cost of motoring entirely predictable because they don't bear the risk of a component failure that economically takes the car off the road. The key point about this is it fundamentally changes the design choices and the vehicle that we will build. And next one, please, Kat. We are not building a product to sell. We're building a revenue generating asset that sits on our balance sheet. If you sell cars, your interests are obsolescence. The term built-in obsolescence came from the auto industry, and high running costs, because the average markup on spare parts is about 1,500%. So in our case, our interests are longevity and low running costs. And critically, the pricing to the customer is not driven by the build cost of the car, because we're not selling it. The price to the customer is driven by the lifetime cost. And the lifetime cost has got three key elements. It's got the build cost, then it's then got all the operating costs, and it's got the end of life. The industry regards end of life as approximately a €200 liability under current legislation. But because we know when we're designing it, it's going to be ours at end of life, we design it for maximum recovery of value, not just raw materials, but components that can be refurbished and used again. And secondly, we design to minimize all the operating costs because we know we're going to be paying them for the life of the car. And thirdly, we want to increase the length of that operating life because, as I say, it's a revenue generating asset. And those three things, an increased revenue stream, longer revenue stream, lower operating costs, and turning end of life into a credit rather than the liability, can all offset a higher build cost. And that means that we can bring the technology to market long before we can match the supply chain costs of petrol engines, which are truly staggeringly low. And if you're selling cars, the only way to compete with a zero carbon car is to bring your supply chain costs down to match those of petrol engines. But to bring the cost down, you need to get the volume up. And to get the volume up, you need to bring the cost down. So it's a real chicken and egg. So this really breaks the economic barriers to bringing new technology to market. Next one, please. The question that comes up all the time when we're asked about hydrogen vehicles is that of infrastructure, and the chicken and egg on that. Who's going to put in the infrastructure before the cars, and who's going to put the cars in before the infrastructure? And paradoxically, I think this is the key to where local communities are much better placed to lead in the revolution in transport than large-scale projects. Unfortunately, governments always underestimate the importance of the local and are very happy to spend big on big national infrastructure projects like HS2, for instance. But if you design a car for intercity motorway use, as Toyota and all the major car companies have been doing, you need sort of something of the order of 300 filling stations to create a credible market for your car in the UK. And Toyota and the major manufacturers are turning around to government saying, well, poor little us, we can't afford that. So government, you've got to subsidize it. And that, to my mind, is not a strategy. It is not a transition strategy, and it's the one thing we're critical of them for, because they've been doing brilliant engineering. I absolutely understand that that's the only way forward for them, and I completely understand that. But I do think that there is no strategic thought about how to bring this to market. However, if you focus on the local market, you can bring that critical scale of infrastructure down from 300 filling stations to just one. And okay, this is a small market, but it's highly concentrated. And the great advantage of that, we use Oxford as a typical example, cities of up to 200,000 people, we think we can unlock the market with just a single filling station. Not us putting in the filling station, we don't want to get involved in that. But if a infrastructure provider puts a filling station into somewhere like Oxford, and we put 100 cars into the area, that means that the filling station has 100 captive customers from day one. Whereas if you're doing nationwide cars and 300 filling stations, most of them would hardly ever see a customer, and it would take years till any of them break even. But it means that you've got a strong business case for the investment in that one filling station. And a hydrogen filling station is just a single pump in a row of pumps beside petrol and diesel pumps. So it's not a huge investment, and a single pump, just like a petrol pump, can support thousands of vehicles. So you don't need a lot of them. And at scale, hydrogen refilling infrastructure is much cheaper than trying to scale pure battery charging infrastructure for all vehicles. But it's not just our vehicles that should use these pumps. We absolutely don't want them to be specific to Riversimple, and we want to look at all other local vehicle segments. So the next slide, please, actually, Kat. The next vehicle that we are producing is a last mile delivery van. And I've absolutely heard and agree with what Gary was saying about collating deliveries rather than having multiple delivery firms going to the same house. But a last mile delivery van is also a vehicle that uses a local duty cycle, but so do local buses, so do all sorts of council vehicles, so do refuse vehicles, and so on. And if we can concentrate the market by having multiple users of hydrogen vehicles, it produces a very strong case for investment in that filling station, and you can scale the infrastructure one filling station at a time. Each one is a standalone business case, doesn't depend on 300 other filling stations. But in so doing, you're incrementally building the skeleton of a nationwide network without ever taking a nationwide gamble. Next slide, please. So this is just a very brief slide about the trial that we're starting. It is truly a beta test. The industry doesn't beta test cars. Customers are never allowed anywhere near a car until it's ready for production. By that stage, everything's cast in stone. So we're putting 20 cars into 2 trials. The main one is in Monmouthshire, but also two of the 20 cars are going into a trial in Pembrokeshire, based at Milford Haven, and this is with the Port Authority there and with Pembrokeshire County Council. And we're going to run these cars right through until we're in production, which we're aiming to be in late 2023. And we've got 280 beta testers signed up to take the cars. We've got the 2 local authorities, and we've got 4 other public sector bodies who will each take a car, and 2 car clubs. And we're trialing slightly the technology, more particularly the sort of the features, what people like and don't like about the car. And most particularly, we're trialing the customer proposition, because people aren't used to accessing a car like this. People aren't used to bundling the cost of ownership of a car. I think we all collude with the industry in not knowing how much our cars really cost us. And so how we present this to customers, how we support them when the cars are in service, is all part of refining not just the car, but also the customer proposition. So that by the time we do come to market, and the actual vehicle will change, not visually, but it will change under the skin very considerably, probably very few shared components between what we've got now and what goes into production in 3 years' time. But it means we will come to market with a better proposition and a better car than if we were just to do this development in isolation on our own. So next slide, please, Kat. I'd just like to stop there. Thank you very much, and delighted to take any questions.
Thank you, Hugo. That was really interesting. I was busily watching your presentation and thought, oh, actually, I better get back to the Q&A. No, it was really fascinating, and yeah, it's interesting to see you already trialing the product in Milford Haven, Pembrokeshire, and was it Monmouthshire as well?
Yes.
Yeah, because I've got family down there, so I'm going to ask them to look out for the cars, and they'll probably be asking if they can get involved, but it might be too late.
No, sure.
We've got some questions coming in from the Q&A, so I'll start with the most popular and work down. So Hannah's asked, how far do you think people would be willing to travel to get to a filling station? Because that was on your slide. Is this a potential barrier to take up?
This car is designed with a 300-mile range, and it's not for 300-mile journeys. It is designed to be a local car, but it's designed specifically to have a range of greater than anything you will need to do in a week. So we wouldn't be endorsing long detours to go and fill up. That would sort of defeat the object of the exercise, and so the filling station we would want to see sited in a tactically sensible spot. And if we went into Shrewsbury, for instance, if somebody commutes into Shrewsbury every day, then that's an obvious customer. But if they're only going in once a week on a Saturday for a weekly shop, they're still a potential customer. It doesn't mean a major detour for them to fill up. There are some people who would never come into Shrewsbury, and we wouldn't be trying to push this car onto them. We absolutely anti that. I've been involved in a consultation on infrastructure of both battery charging and hydrogen. And one of the arguments that has been articulated really explicitly is that we don't need to worry about the density of filling stations, because with autonomous vehicles, you're going to be able to go to work and send the car 25 miles out of town to be refueled, and it'll be back at your office before the end of the working day. And that's 50 miles of congestion. And even if it's zero emissions, it's all the tire particulates, it's the energy. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. So yes, I'm keen on reducing mileage.
Yeah, and I suppose the exciting part is you're already doing this, whereas a lot of those conversations feel very far away from those of us who live in a rural area. When are we going to see an autonomous vehicle that drives itself, fills itself up, and takes us to work? That isn't going to hit the net zero targets, is it? In my head,
I think there's a lot of environmental negative unintended consequences that are likely to happen. Unfortunately, the deployment of new technologies, as we know, tends to be driven by those who stand to make money from it, and we don't really sit back and ask whether we should deploy it, because you never make money from not doing something.
So I'm going to carry on with the questions, because there's a few more that have come in. So yeah, there's another one just about being in a rural area and the challenge of living many miles from each other and then being able to fill up, which you've sort of covered there. I've just asked you a question about if you can't, in terms of accessibility to access this new type of car sharing mileage scheme. Is it affordable? Is it going to be as affordable as owning a car?
Yes, we're benchmarking against the bottom of the range diesel Golf, and we think we can come to market at that price. Of course, that isn't matching the price of second-hand cars, because we haven't got any second-hand ones yet. But as the car gets older, the fixed monthly direct debit will come down. The mileage rate will stay the same, and so older cars will become cheaper and cheaper to own, although they don't, as I said earlier, there isn't the risk of a component failure. So they probably won't be absolutely as cheap as buying a banger and running it, but equally there's no risk of it being off the road next week.
Yeah, which is a real battle, isn't it?
Yes. Also, another angle to your question is that it's not surprising, I think, that our business model, being a sustainable car company, we've come up with a business model that is absolutely compatible with car sharing. Car sharing is an absolutely critical development, and of course, if you sell cars, it's a very threatening trend, because you sell fewer cars. The car industry is embracing car sharing, supposedly, but it's essentially a matter of getting bums on seats in the hope that you can sell them a car later, getting a bit of brand loyalty. They will never make a car for the car sharing segment. And I know Robin Chase, I met her about 10 years ago, who set up Zipcar, and she asked if we were going to set up a car club, and we said no. But we're keen to make cars sell cars to provide cars for car sharing clubs, but it's just another customer. He said, well, that's where you're wrong, because actually we need a different car, and the industry is never going to make a car for us. We have to spend £1,500 retrofitting technology. We would, because we're not selling cars, we're selling mileage, and it's absolutely compatible with car sharing, that model, but it doesn't mean that it's incompatible with those who still need personal access to a. And if you're in a rural area, I think car sharing becomes increasingly awkward.
Yes. Well, there are things out there. It'll be interesting to see. I think car sharing is evolving quite rapidly at the moment in terms of people's engagement with car sharing is definitely evolving, and I hope that'll be a positive response to COVID. I've got. Yes. I can just probably squeeze in a couple more questions. There's another question from Julian here. Does the customer business model encourage high usage and consequently congestion in issues? But yeah.
Very, very pertinent question, and it's not. You pay for the mileage. You do pay. Indicatively, we're talking about 18p a mile. So the more you drive, the more you'll pay. So it doesn't encourage it to that extent. We have been attacked that if you make carbon-free travel cheap, isn't going to increase car mileage, and I absolutely don't want to see, and that's one of the downsides, quite frankly, of COVID, getting people out of mass transport systems. But I absolutely don't want to. As I said earlier, this is a necessary technological change. It is not the panacea to cure everything, and it only works with some other complementary policy initiatives. Absolutely, we should be paying more for personal travel than we do for mass transport systems. But the fact that there is a rebound effect potential from having cheap and clean cars is no reason to carry on making dirty and inefficient cars. It's a necessary but not sufficient element of the solution.
I'm going to end on one more question. There was a question about non-manned hydrogen pumps in rural areas, but also another one about are we going to be encouraged to make a choice between hydrogen and electric? Do we have that choice now? I mean, EVs are everywhere. There's quite a few car manufacturers that make EVs. It's not so easy to access a hydrogen vehicle yet. So do you think we'll end up with having to make a choice between the two?
I don't think people will own both. It depends on what your sort of duty cycle is. I think there are a lot of people in rural locations for whom battery vehicle makes absolute sense. The choice about which technology you go for would be driven by what your use patterns are. But if you're regularly driving long distance, I think that doing it with batteries is going to become it's simply not plausible for the vast majority vast majority of mileage. We often hear, and this is a sleight of hand really, that 80% of journeys is less than 20 miles, and that's absolutely true. And I absolutely believe we should be using batteries for most of those journeys. But the corollary of that is that 80% of the miles are driven in the other 20% of journeys. And therefore that is 4 times the problem in terms of energy consumption. And when you're And the energy efficiency, I believe, in a sustainable, renewably powered world becomes an order of magnitude more efficient, more important than it ever has been before. And the efficiency of vehicles depends hugely on weight, and batteries are heavy. And that's why they're no good for long range. So our car weighs less than the battery does in a Tesla. And there's a variety of other problems other than just the energy efficiency, just the sheer material resource consumption. Having a 700 kilo battery in a car, we simply can't have that in an all-pervasive manner. So we need both of them. But I certainly equally don't endorse the idea of having two cars, one for short range use and one for long range use, because that absolutely doesn't make sense. But I think the majority of application, your duty cycle can be met by one or the other, and car sharing allows you to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
When you need, for instance, an occasional long journey. Don't buy a car for it, rent one, use it, share it.
Great, thank you for that, Hugo. There's a strong message there at the end from Hugo that I think we all appreciate. So that's the end of I'm going to wind up the Q&A there. I'll export the questions for Hugo later, and I'll hand back to Juliana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you ever so much for that, Hugo. I really enjoyed that. You were talking a lot of my language, rebound effect, regenerative cycles, concept, end of life. Yeah. It's great to hear actually that the companies really considered the product life cycle, from a systems level that many other automotive companies just can't do, and from that kind of concept to that whole regenerative cycle, and also that you're applying a different business model to the traditional business model, so very much tied into the circular economy, as you mentioned, where you sell a service rather than the product. And actually, I know there are companies out there, not in the automotive world, so the Bosches and the Philips, that you can pay for each wash cycle, and it's great to know that it's starting to move into other industries as well, especially the automotive industry. So that's absolutely fantastic. So I'd really like to thank you very much for your presentation today. I'm sure you'll get lots more questions on that. Okay, super. So just to wrap up, thank you. Just to wrap up today, and I think Hannah might also want to say something, and Alan as well as a joint promoters today of this event. I'd really like to thank Alan Carr from Sustainability West Midlands, Hannah from Fit for the Future, also Jamie Cole from Department for Transport, Vanessa Strange from Lincolnshire County Council, Professor Gary Bosworth from Northumbria University in Newcastle, and also Hugo Spowers from Riversimple in Powys. I would also very much like to thank Mark Ricketts as well from Impact RI, who's provided this fantastic platform for us today. First time we've used it. Brilliant. Would love to be able to use this platform again. So just a couple of things, if I may. I will be really quick. So there was a sustainability roadmap that Alan mentioned, so it's worth having a look at that. They've also got their annual conference next week on the 3rd of December. Jamie mentioned about the decarbonising transport document and setting the challenge that came out this year, so have a look at that. He also mentioned the call for evidence for a rural strategy as well, and I think that's got to be in February 2021. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I am wrong, but they're really looking to try and seek our opinions and trends in transport, and ultimately what the government's approach should be in that sphere for access. Vanessa is really happy to provide visits to talk through the DRT network models, so I'm sure you'll have lots of visits at some point, Vanessa. We certainly would very much like to come and talk to you, as I'm sure many of my Shropshire Council colleagues on the call today would as well. Gary, really interested to hear from yourself in the whole area of rural entrepreneurship development and what you're doing in Lincolnshire, and also how that can be I'm having a moment, I can't think of the word. It's not transported, not translated, but to other counties in the UK. I'm clearly drinking too much gin during COVID. It's not good, is it? Killing those brain cells. And then finally, Hugo, thanks for a really interesting presentation today. Again, better proposition, better car, more car sharing. Really like your business model. So one final thing, if I may, Alan and Hannah, just some kind of final thoughts for me. I made these going along today. So, and these were in bullets. So I think there's probably a really clear direct engagement with the end user, and which is critical to achieving absolutely everything we've talked about today. So integrated rural transport and mobility. And if we have that, we'll hopefully better understand the travel behaviour of individuals, and maybe more tailored planning of services. So that kind of ties into what Gary was saying as well about rural innovation hubs. And I think it's really clear to me, as somebody that doesn't really know a huge amount in this area, that the transferability of rural shared solutions is really quite limited at the moment by the sheer diversity of rural communities and our mobility needs, actually. So I think what we need to do is to think about the best fit rather than a literal transfer of solutions, where we can focus on actually adopting solutions to different local contexts. So that's all from me. If I could hand over to Alan and Hannah to have some final closing comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliana, and thanks to everyone for their participation today. What we should do, of course, is very much thank the team at CREST, because they've done all the hard work putting today's event on and making sure it all ran smoothly. We know that this is many people's first attempt at using the Remo platform, so hopefully it was a useful experience for everybody. It certainly was for us, and it's certainly a different type of networking experience to other more traditional platforms we've used. So thanks again for the CREST team for the use of that platform today. The only thing I'll say is Juliana very kindly advertised our conference again, so I won't have to do that. But I think the only thing I'll say is my favourite events, whether they be online or in person, are the ones where I come away from it feeling positive about the future in terms of the topic that we've been talking about. And I think today is certainly one of those. I think as I've said at the very start, I've had a bit of personal experience with this issue, and it was frankly quite a negative experience. So seeing all of these examples and what's going on in different parts of the country, I think is great. And I think the thing I'd like to sort of offer is for where any organisations here have done stuff on this agenda already, or are working on things, projects, activities that have had pretty tangible benefits, or that are likely to in future, then please do share it with us and celebrate your success, because that's what we're all about, and we want to make sure that you that we've got as many examples as we can to scale up and to share with others. So I think that's the final message from me, and I'll hand over to Hannah.
Thanks, Alan. Hopefully my sound is a little better now. Sometimes my computer sounds like it's going to take off, so I apologise. Yeah, just to echo everything that's gone previously, really, a massive thank you to CREST and to Sustainability West Midlands for inviting us. What I found today was that we had some really practical, tangible case studies and examples, which is going to make this agenda much more real rather than based in theory and loose ambition. And I think if we can take that away and apply that sort of thinking to the way that we address this topic, we can go a long way. And I would echo the message about having a positive outcome. There are organisations all across the UK working on these kinds of issues as well. Some of the network members, but others in very different guises. And I think if we can all continue to share, to collaborate, we will reach the solutions much more quickly. So I've been very impressed by the openness and honesty and the willingness to really share what's been happening across today's presentations. And really happy to support that and to raise that profile and to help you in terms of what you're doing, and share that out with our networks as well, as Alan said. And equally, where you want to learn from what the members are doing in our sectors, then there are plenty of news stories and articles on our website that link not always directly to the rural transport issue, but certainly to what other people are doing in the field of kind of electric vehicles, fleets, and so on. So and do have a look on there. But please do send any other questions and say thank you for letting me be part of today. It was really good.
Okay, thanks again, everybody, and thank you very much to the audience for all your questions. We will get to answer all of those, so please bear with us, but thanks once again. I think Kat just briefly wants to say something. This is the last thing from me about the Quark questions, so I will turn myself off and I will hand you over to Kat.
Thank you, Juliana. Sorry, trying to turn my microphone on. This is probably very tiny. I'm not sure how well you can see it. But if you make the screen with the Quark bit on big, you should be able to see the answers potentially. Basically, I just wanted to very quickly share what the top answers are for the question that we asked this morning. We had quite a small interaction rate because obviously it was only open for a few hours and people were obviously very engaged in watching the presentations and not answering our Quark questions. But what Quark does is it basically ranks the ideas that you submitted. So we've sort of got the popular ideas about why people aren't using rail, is to do with the price discrepancy for journeys, and that maybe a solution would be integrated ticketing, where you could travel to work on the train and home on the bus for sort of the same price rather than having to buy 2 separate tickets. And the third most popular is access to a station, which I think is probably something that is a big challenge in rural areas. So basically Quark has done all this and it sort of ranks the ideas from your adjudications. So it's quite interesting really. It also, if you have a live report, it shows you how the sort of popularity, I'm a bit reluctant to use that word, but the popularity of the ideas change over time. So you can sort of choose one and it shows that it might have been popular at the beginning and then maybe as more answers came in, it sort of decreased in popularity a little bit. So I find that quite interesting. But I am by no means an expert. Mark Ricketts is the one to talk to if you'd like to find out more about Quark. And thank you very much to people who have participated in our Quark questions. It's been great to hear your ideas. So I'll go now and we'll go back to the floor and then people can carry on networking. Thank you.